And we are back. Where were we? We were about to completely rebuild the server profile config stuff. Um, Personally, I like having things that do stuff for me so I don't have to worry about it down the line. So I think we will attempt to see if we can get this profile config handler to do that for us. Okay, back when this was created, we put in a to-do thing. So I think it would be a good idea to add in a flag here that deals with whether the contents of the profile list has changed. So now we need to figure out how we want to move profiles in and out, how we want to be able to access them, and so on and so forth. Since we're going to need this as part of a list, the quick and easy way would be to simply expose the list of profiles as a property, because then we can more easily access it, but it does present a small problem in terms of detecting whether changes have been made unless we assume something, which of course we can easily do. But let's see what we can come up with here. The only instance where we effectively need to keep track of how many items or profiles we have in the list is when we are saving the configuration. During load, we need this information so we know exactly how many profiles to load. For the sake of it, we will do a list of type server profile and just call it profiles. There we go. And then we'll expose that as a property. Return this, and when we have something assigned to it, we need to update the changed flag. So here we'll grab whatever comes in and then update our changed flag. Now this assumes that some kind of change is made, since the set of the property will only be activated when we write something to the list in terms of changing the contents for some reason. We can somewhat safely assume that some change was made. So that would be the assumption of the day. Let's see, contains the list of current server profiles. There we go. All right, so now that we have the changed flag, we can do a check to see if we need to actually save it. There we go. And yes, I'm aware that this can be a one-liner. I try to avoid using those while on stream. When I do projects not on stream, I often do this. Some may want the curly brackets in there just to be sure that this stuff actually belongs to that. Again, it's personal preference. Compile-wise, it makes little to no difference. Okay, saves any changes made to the server profiles list. There we go. We already have the loading handled, so we effectively don't need to expose any kind of method to handle the actual loading of the profiles. We do that when we instantiate the class itself, so that's fairly easy. We could, for the sake of making life a little easier for us, in terms of how much typing we need to do, we could add in a public void add and then specify that this must be a server profile, and then simply just add it to the list itself, which of course means changed. By having this one, let's say it's called server config dot. That's not what I wanted to showcase there. Profiles add, and then the profile. Having this method effectively converts this into this, making this one more desirable because it's less typing. The actual functionality is exactly the same. We can also expose a count as a property, might as well. So we need a public int count. Resharper. Honestly, I have no idea. Never used it. I'm kind of old school, I guess. I don't like being dependent on too many different things. So if I can do it myself, then I prefer doing it myself rather than have some tool or library do it for me. The only situation where I rely on some kind of library is if it's something I've built myself. I often go through and grab certain parts of a project somewhere, say a collection of classes or something, and stuff them in my own personal code snippets collection, and then grab those from there whenever I need them, so I don't have to recreate that particular part of a library or some other setup. But generally speaking, I try to avoid becoming dependent on a lot of different things. Well, I'll definitely have a look at it and see what it is after stream at some point. Anyway, count. This would then be the profiles count property. There we go. Again, just to save a little bit on typing. Convenience, I guess, returns the total number of profiles stored. There we go. Adds the past server profile to the config list. There we go. The profile to add. And since we're now putting in multiples in here, I'll do this so we can collapse them individually. This would also be one save. And there we go. And one more that might be nice to have is a remove option based on an index. For the list, it's called remove at. But for our purposes, I think we'll just call it remove. and we could potentially overload this to accept either a profile or accept an index. So might as well do that. Remove server profile, and another one that accepts the index, profile index. There we go. So for this one, should be fairly simple. The profiles.remove, and then pass the profile. Assume that some kind of change was made. Here we need to check that the past index is within range before we attempt the remove, just to avoid any kind of error popping up. So we'll do a quick check, make sure this is greater than or equal to 0, and that it is also less than the count of the list. And if it is, then remove at, which takes an index, and there we go. Again, we assume some kind of change was made, so we'll inform the save method of the change. Removes the specified profile from the profile list. There we go. The profile to remove. Boom. Removes the profile at the specified index from the profile list. The index number of the profile to remove. Nice. There we go. Now we can add, remove, we can save. And as needed, we can directly index a specific profile and assign a new value to it, and it will then also properly update our changed flag. So this should suffice in terms of input and output of data for the individual profiles. So here again we have a couple of different ones. Keep them separated. Profiles and end region down here. Job done. Okay, so the next part of this that we need to look into is the saving and loading of this stuff. Now we already know that the server profile contains a name. It contains the path to where the server resides. It contains the name of the jar to use and a memory setting. So those in particular we need to be aware of when generating the different groups that exist within the config file. Okay, so let's see. First of all, since we need to rebuild these two, we may need to change a few things. Load config. We definitely need to keep track of the number of profiles, both when loading and saving. And we may also want to do a little bit of cleanup operation. When profiles are removed from the list itself, we kind of need the config file to reflect that as well. So for the save config, which is based on our ini class, we will start by effectively deleting all of the groups, thereby cleaning up the config file, and then writing new groups based on the current profile list. And the way we can do this is, let's see, we don't exactly have a clear method on the ini class, if I remember right. Let's check. Do we have a clear? No, we don't. It might be beneficial to add one of those so we don't have to go through things manually. So let's go do that quick and see if we can get something added in here. There's a save, load, load. The public methods end right here, so we'll add in a clear method. Clear? There we go. Okay, so what do we need to clears the contents of the ini structure? Alright, so let's go up here somewhere and see what kind of data we need to mess with. Now at the top up here, not as of yet. You've mentioned it now, so it's another one of those on my things of list of things to look into. Honestly, over the past, well, I guess about 5 years or so, I've seen a lot of new languages pop up or descriptions of languages being developed. I also see that a lot of them have root in the Linux environment, Linux community. For the most part, most of these languages that are popping up originate from there, and I honestly don't see the need for creating yet another scripting language, which seems to be the trend coming from the Linux community. I don't mean any offense by any of this, but at the moment we have something like 80 different scripting languages that are all fully capable of doing pretty much the same thing. Why do we need new ones? If it's for the sake of learning how to build a language or how to build a specific script interpreter, then, well, grab one of the existing ones and build it from there. I don't really see the need for 200 new languages, since we already have some granted old but very proven languages that are perfectly capable of doing the job at hand. Um, but I will definitely add that to my list of things to check out. That's for sure. Anyways, up here we have a key pair collection and we have a group collection. And these all reside in the mvar groups. So, for the sake of clearing stuff, which we have right here, the quick way of doing it is simply to set this one to ini group 0. There we go, all cleared. That's the nice thing about using arrays. Job done. So, config ini.clear, we can now clear it, and then we can start building up all of the different things that we need to put in here. So, first of all, save the number of profiles. So we'll do that, set value, and as we did before, use the profiles group, throw in a count, and then do the count from here, converting it to a string. That takes care of saving the count to disk. Next up, save the individual profiles. For that, we're going to need a loop that runs through the number of profiles that we have. like so, and then we effectively replicate this, except here, of course, we also need to add in one to store the given name for the profile. So let's start with that one. We also need to figure out whether we want to make these 0-based or 1-based for the counter. We will do those 0-based just because we can. Set value, that would then be profile plus the counter, and then the name for it, and we'll grab the name from here. We already know it's a string, so no conversion needed. We'll put in the profile again plus the counter, and we'll add in the path. There we go. And we may want to put, let's see, let's rename these to server path instead and server jar. There we go. Profile plus the counter and server jar, and grab it from the profile. And finally, we need to throw in the memory size. Set value, again, the current profile, and memory. And here, of course, we have to do a toString because this is an integer. So we'll do a string conversion. There we go. And finally, we can uncomment this to have it actually save it. And the very last thing that we need to do is to clear the changed flag. Since we have now saved, we can avoid any future saves if nothing has changed. Okay, that takes care of saving. Then we need to rebuild the loading. Here we will definitely need the profile count. We will also need to either do a check on the previous setup or simply just delete the current profile config and then configure new ones from scratch. I think we'll do the latter. That way we don't have to add in extra code just to be effectively backwards compatible on our own product that we are still working on. So we'll just kill it. Alright, so to load up the memory stuff, we will make use of the fixint method we've got here for string to integer conversion. By using this one, we can avoid having to type it out manually. So it's just a little helper here. Let's get the count from the config ini get value. We need to get it from the profiles group, and we need to get the key called count, which we know is a numeric value, so we convert it into an integer here. This allows us to do a loop. So let's go through a loop here, and then fetch all the different properties of it. Now we chose name, server path, server jar, and memory. So we'll grab those. grab this one, get value from profile plus the counter, and get the name. Okay, we also need the server path, get value, again the profile, and get the server path key. And the same thing for the server jar. Get value. There we go. Whoops. And the server jar. And lastly, we need to get the memory, which is an integer. So we'll just do memory, and again do the fix int for conversion, and fetch the key from the ini file. Whoops. There we go, and that would then be memory. Nice. Next up, we need to add it to our list. However, before we do that, we kind of need to make sure that the list is cleared, so we will clear it. And then we can do, we can add the actual profile, so new server profile. And it takes name, path, jar, and memory size. So name, comma, server path, comma, server jar, comma, memory. And this one was incorrect. There we go. We now have the ability to load whatever saved profiles may have been on disk. And the one interesting thing about this is if this particular file doesn't exist and we attempt to fetch the key called count from the group called profiles and none of these two exist, then fixint will ensure that we get a 0. Because if we pass an empty string to fixint and it attempts to convert that into an actual integer value, the try pass method may choose to either convert it into 0 or choose to report back that it was unable to convert it, i.e. it returns false. So in either case, we pre-initialize the result to 0. If it fails, we force a return of 0, and if it's successful, we return the number. Now, if the group profiles and the key count don't exist, get value will return an empty string, so the result will be we get a count of 0, which means this entire loop won't happen. Pretty nice and clear. Alright, finally, just to make sure that we have everything on track, we need to make sure that the changed flag is set to false. We should always make sure that such a flag is set to its false value after loading up, even though a load process might trigger the changed flag to become true. The safe way of ensuring that we are in sync with what just went on is to ensure that it's forced to false. We just loaded the data from disk, so there are no changes. Right. That should take care of this. Next up, we kind of need to kill the old config file, because if we try to load it up right now, we will only get partial information. So, where exactly are we storing this stuff? Common application data, which would be the program data folder on the C drive, along with a subfolder called Minecraft Server Launcher. So let's go and see if we can get rid of that. It should be in here somewhere. Minecraft Server Launcher, and there's the old server profile. Since we don't need that right now, we shall simply delete it. Boom. Nice. Desync problems solved. All right, so this should take care of handling more than one server profile. So let's go and see if we can do something about that. So we have the add button, which allows us to create a new server profile. So let's recreate the one profile that we just deleted. And since our configuration handler is now capable of accepting our server profile structure, it should be fairly straightforward. So let's start by creating a private instance of the server profile config, and we'll just call it yeah, we'll just call it config, whatever. It doesn't really need to be any huge revelation name-wise, as long as we know what it is. In the add button, since we are getting a brand new server profile from the dialog, we don't really need to do much besides adding this new profile to our current configuration, which would be dialog.profile. There we go. And then, for the sake of it, we will trigger a save. This now very quickly and easily adds the new profile to our saved configuration, and from there we can then also access it and edit the contents of it. Now, for the sake of supporting today's development of multi-profile support in the program, I actually went ahead and created a small extra Minecraft server instance, which is based on a Forge server 1.710, where I pre-installed Railcraft just for the sake of it. So let's see if we can set up these two profiles. Okay, we want to add a new profile, and this one would be the vanilla 1.12.2 instance. So we'll go fetch that, which is right here, and we'll assign it 256 megs. Nah, we'll do 512 just for the sake of it. Accept. All right. And then we will add the other one, which will be the Railcraft 1710, which is right here. And here we need to use the Forge one, not the Minecraft one. And we'll assign a gig. There we go. Okay. We have gotten ourselves a new config file, and let's have a look at it. There we go. Everything set up exactly like we did through our interface. Of course, there are some things that we need to do a little bit differently in terms of handling multiple profiles, but as you can see, first one is called profile 0, second one is called profile 1, just like the counter says. This basically takes care of running with multiple different profiles. We still need to implement some form of handling of each individual profile. So now that we actually have some data to work with, we can start doing something about the UI. So let's see what we can get done about that. Okay, so here we put some notes on telling us what kind of information we may want to put up here. Now the start stops thing we converted into a couple of buttons, so we can get rid of that. There's a configuration window here. We want to expand on that at some point. We could potentially do that through the standard edit button, and then on the, let's see, server profile config dialog here, add another button that allows us to do this configuration. We'll see how it turns out. Logically, I think it would be beneficial for us to put in the server properties editor along with the server profile. That way at least we don't need to worry about figuring out what to name that particular button. We'll see. For now, we do have a configuration window. Get rid of that. This maintenance schedules is for the future. We will need to do a small rework of the server host class to allow us to be able to set up say restart and backup schedules. The way I would want this to work is by allowing us to set a specific time of day where it shuts down the server. If say a checkbox is set, do a backup of the world data and then restart the server. If it's a regular service restart, then it'll just shut down the server and start it up again. But we need some extra functionality to A, handle the time of day scheduling, and B, do the actual shutdown and start up again. Plus C, implement some method of doing a backup, which could either be a simple file copy, or we could stuff the contents into a zip. If we decide to put it into a zip, we need to keep in mind that there is an upper limit to how big a zip file can be. And sometimes these server world folders grow way bigger than a zip can support. So that's something we need to keep in mind. Maintenance schedules, that's for the future too. Config custom name, yes, we added that. MOTD we can get from the server properties if it exists, otherwise we need to somehow inform that it has not been configured. The same goes for the port number. We need to add in some kind of status, what's it doing right now, player count, and so on. These we can easily do. Alright, I also set aside a picture box and pre-configured it to be 64 by 64 pixels. The reason for doing that is so that we can add in a server icon. Now for the vanilla server, there's actually an icon in here because it's based on an original single-player save game. So this particular icon was generated by Minecraft itself, and just for the sake of it, we'll use that for the vanilla server. So we'll copy it out here, and if memory serves, it just needs to be server-icon. Is it server-icon or server icon? I cannot remember. We'll see. In any case, we can look for this particular file. No, actually, I'm gonna look it up quick. Minecraft server icon. Um, let's see. Da, 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 da. If memory serves, it has to be server-icon. Um, yes, it looks that way. All right. So if we want to put that on our profile, then at least we need to set aside the space for it. We could potentially just put up a black square if there's no icon, and if there actually is an icon, we can load it up from disk and display it. So let's see if we can start building this as some kind of surface rendering. For now, I will leave the controls on here, but set all of them to invisible. That way we at least still have them as a reference, but at runtime they won't be visible. The only thing that will be visible is what we decide to put in here. Okay, so let's see. We may run into a small handling problem in terms of loading and displaying the server icon. So one thing that we could do is we could put it into the server profile. Might as well. Add in a bitmap here. Icon. Then stuff it here. And force this to be null. That way we can do a simple null check to figure out whether one has been loaded or not. During the load routine, we could even pre-generate, say, a black square. In case no server icon was found, we could grab some custom setup if we wanted to. For the moment, I think we will just add in a quick profile check method. So we'll go up here, add some internal helper methods, and then do one that, say, is called check server profiles. And then have this one either load or generate an image accordingly. Okay, so let's see, form events. This would be one that we could call as part of the load event, and we should probably also do a run on this in the add button and the edit button, just for the sake of reloading them to make sure that we actually do have some usable data. Okay. To do this, we need to loop through the profiles, and in this case we have the count exposed here, like so. And then we can do a quick check to see if the jar is actually there, and if it is, let's see if we can find the server icon PNG. Hello there, Daro. Welcome to the stream. So, first of all, let's check if the config is correct in terms of exists config.profiles.p.path plus the jar. If the jar is there, then there's a fair chance that we have the right folder. So let's see if a server icon exists in this folder. Let's see, that would be the path. Well, I'm what you consider an old school programmer. I started my programming career back in the DOS days, and I've been through God knows how many different languages over the years. And my opinion generally is the day that you tell yourself, I know everything about programming, that's the day you need to stop doing any kind of programming because you have lost touch. All programming languages constantly evolve, which means you go through a constant learning process. And that also goes for how you choose to use the code. So it is a ever evolving, ever process of always learning. And yes, I am also learning new stuff every single day, even at my level. So keep learning. It's the only way forward. We were checking if there is a file called server icon png. If it exists, we'll see if we can load it. But before we do that, we should probably see if one is already loaded. So let's see if the current profile icon is different from null. If it is, then we'll dispose it, get rid of it. Grab this quick, dispose, and then we'll set it to null just to make sure that it's properly cleared. Right, we can't do that. Here we then need to try and load it, but since we're dealing with file I/O, we definitely need to put it inside a try catch. So we shall do that. See if we can new bitmap. That would then be the config profiles path plus the server icon png. And we still cannot modify the return value. This is not a, yeah, you're right. Okay, I'll do it this way instead then. Grab it from there. If this particular profile and this particular profile, yes, I know it's a singular form. There we go. No indexing required. Get rid of it. Now we should be able to kill this one. And the same goes for here. Grab that one. Now we can do it. Nice. Now, if something went wrong here, to make sure that we don't end up with garbled data, we will simply do another check on this and kill it. There have been instances where it has partially loaded up a file, some image file, and parts of the bitmap object became instantiated, which is why I still do a proper check on it here to make sure that it can be disposed, and if it has a partial load of it, it will dispose properly and free up the memory resources, and then we can properly kill it. Okay. Next up, we could actually add in a quick flag here to determine whether the icon was loaded or not. There. If this succeeds, then we should be able to set this true, and it will then indicate to us that we actually did manage to load it, which means we need to update it. Okay, if we didn't load it, or the icon is null, then we will generate a new black image, which is also pretty straightforward. Create a new bitmap. Um, we know it needs to be 64 by 64 pixel format. Do that as a 32 bits per pixel ARGB. We'll need to grab a graphics object for graphics.fromImage, the icon, and then we'll do a fill rectangle, brushes, black, new rectangle 0.0 to 64, 64. There we go. Dispose the graphics object. Job done. And we can set icon loaded to true here. And then if an icon was loaded, then assign this profile that we fetched up here back to the config object. So this would be the profile equals this profile. There we go. This should take care of running through each individual configured server profile and look for a server icon. If it exists, it loads it. Otherwise, it creates icon. Create a black icon instead. There we go. This one we should probably call over here in the add button just to get them refreshed. We will also need to editing once we have a UI that supports selecting. This part is of course very important. If we can't select a specific server profile, then we don't know which one to edit. So next up, let's see if we can do some painting here. Okay, so if we actually do have some server profiles stored, then we need to start throwing some stuff on the form. And the count from the config object determines how many we need to draw. At the moment we don't have 2, but we could potentially have, say, 10 of those, which would most likely exceed the height of this form in its current size. Of course, we could then simply just resize it, but at some point we may need to implement some kind of catch code that, for example, allows us to detect whenever the mouse scroll wheel is used, so we can scroll up and down the list. It's something we'll get into later on. For now, let's see if we actually do have a count. So, if this one is greater than 0, then we definitely need to put something on. There's absolutely no point in trying to draw something on the form if we don't have any profiles to draw. So, from here, let's see if we can figure out how much space we need for showing a profile. That kind of depends on what kind of information we're putting in here, of course. And it definitely also depends on the server icon. So we already know that we have a certain size in terms of height, which is 64 pixels plus some kind of spacing. But we don't really know how wide this could end up becoming. So we'll settle on some random chosen width, just so we can center it on the form. So let's just assume that we will be using, say, I don't know, 500 pixels. So max width equals 500, We kind of need to know the inner width and the inner height of the form. So we will grab a calculation of those. Inner width equals the form width minus the two borders, which are 8 pixels each, so that's 16. We also need an inner height to figure out exactly how much rendering space is available to us. That would be the height of the form. And again, we need the bottom border plus the height of the window title bar, which comes to a total of 38 pixels. You can find these through a bit of experimentation, say for example by throwing in some control on the form that sits right up at the corner and resize it to fit the borders, then anchor it in place and have some code dump it in the debug to show you the exact size of it versus the size of the window. There are tons of different ways to figure it out. But these are static, they don't change. Somebody at some point mentioned to me that there might be a registry entry somewhere that describes these particular sizes, and I did go looking for them at some point, but honestly I found it easier to just do a bit of quick code to figure out what those sizes are and then see if they change. They didn't, so these should suffice for now. One thing that we do have as a problem right now is the inner height. And the reason we have a problem here is because we have these buttons at the bottom of the form. So we kind of need to figure out how much space they take up. And one way we can do that is by examining the size of a individual button. Each button has a height of 23. Since there are two buttons stacked on top of each other, we need to at least set aside twice that space. Then we can look at the location for one button and the location for a different button, which would be the Y position. So 348 and 377. So if we do 377 minus 348, that leaves a total distance of 29 pixels. Since we can see that the button has a height of 23, we subtract 23 and get a spacing of 6 pixels. As we can see here visually, there is a greater distance between the border of the form and the bottom buttons, which of course comes down to some kind of spacing here. So we know that we at least need a spacing of 6. So since we need spacing at the bottom, in the middle, and above it, that's 6, and then let's just add, I don't know, another 6 for the fun of it. So adjust for buttons at the bottom of the form. Inner height, we will subtract 2 times button add.height plus 3 times the spacing we calculated, and then we will add in I don't know, 5 should be enough. There we go. That should take care of it. 2 buttons stacked on top of each other, each has a height of 23 pixels. We have 3 spacings needed, each calculated to be 6 pixels. Add another 5 pixels for the bottommost spacing, just because we can. There we go. That should suffice. Now, we can do a quick run to see if we got something that might fit. So we shall do that quick. Since we are in the paint event, the event arcs exposes the graphics object to us. That lets us draw directly on the form. So for the sake of testing whether this is a sufficient height, we will simply draw a line across the entire form. And here we'll just use a black color. We need to start at the leftmost x position, which is 0. We'll use the inner height as the y position, and then the opposite point would be the rightmost position, which at the moment is the inner width. So we'll grab that and again specify the inner height for the y position of the line. And this should take care of drawing a line just above the buttons. So let's have a quick look. There we go. Well, it seems that our spacing is almost perfect. We could add a little bit more just to move that line a little bit further up. So let's do that by adjusting the extra. So let's go 8 and see how this looks. There we go, much better. Nice and easy. Okay, one more thing that we probably should do is recolor the background of the form to match the other forms that we've created. So let's change this one to that gray. These we still don't need, but for the sake of readability, we'll put these up in the gray just like we did before. There we go. All right. Now, of course, it'll be more difficult to see the line across, so we'll do a white one. There we go. Sweet. Okay. Now, let's see if we can start putting some information up there. We've specified that we want a maximum width for displaying the actual server profile of 500 pixels in pixels. And this, of course, is also in pixels, and this is also in pixels. There we go. Okay. Draw a line across the form showing the inner height. There we go. Okay. We have a number of profiles, so let's try to loop through them. For the sake of being able to show some kind of profile selector, we may want to think about adding some kind of padding or spacing for each profile. So let's set a spacing between them of I don't know, 5 pixels, 5 pixels margin. So 5 above, 5 below, to the left and to the right. So we also need to keep track of where on the form we are drawing. So we may need an X position. And this X position, if we want to center all the stuff that we are drawing, we may need to use the inner width to calculate where the initial x position should be. So to do that, we will need to grab the inner width, subtract the max width, and divide it by 2. There we go. We also need to know where to start on the y position. So for now, we will set a y position at 5, since we decided to use a margin of 5 pixels. And this should take care of it. Okay, then we can loop through the profiles. Less than config.count. And there we go. Alright, so first of all, let's draw the server icon. If it exists, here it is vitally important that we actually check whether this particular bitmap has been created or not. If we always assume that it's created, then during the startup process we can easily run into the bitmap still being null, which of course would cause this to crash. So important, we need to keep track of this. If it's not null, then we will draw it. Draw image. Grab the icon that we loaded up earlier. It says point and rectangle and all that stuff, but we can actually specify them directly. So let's just do that. There we go. Now, next up, we need to render some text. So, to ensure that we are in the appropriate position, we need to offset where we begin drawing the text. And we need to offset it by the intended width of the server icon, which is 64 by 64 pixels. So the position where we need to start drawing the text would at least need to be past that size. We know that we have we should have a name available to us. So let's start by drawing that next to the server icon. For that, we will be using the drawString method of the graphics object. It requires a string, some kind of font reference, a brush, and a position of where we need to draw this thing. So let's have a look at that. This would be the name, and then it needs some kind of font. For now, we'll just use the one from the form. We can create other font instances and use those for drawing the string. We'll grab I don't know, let's do the cornflower blue just because we can. And then we need to remember to offset at least by the width of this server icon. And some kind of spacing, so let's add another 10 pixels. And the current Y position should match nicely, so we will just use that. There we go. Now let's give this a spin and see if this actually works. There is one thing that we probably need to get out of the way, and that is that whenever this particular method is run, we should probably force a draw update of the form itself. So once we finish running this loop, we will simply tell Windows that whatever's on the form is no longer valid. This instructs the Windows rendering engine to redraw. Greetings, NK Builder. Welcome to the stream. So let's see if this works or if we end up crashing horribly. Wow, something actually worked. Now, why did we end up getting this weird stuff drawn on top of each other? And that happened because we didn't update the Y position. I'm developing a Minecraft server launcher that will be capable of running multiple instances of a Minecraft server. There are more details in the panels below the screen on the Twitch page. Right now I'm implementing some custom UI painting, so we can show things like the server icon, the title for it, and so on. Right now it's localhost, so you won't be able to connect to it. It's only running locally here. Okay, we needed to update the Y position, which we forgot to do. So let's see if we can get that done. Now we set a margin of 5 pixels, so we know that we at least need to add the height of the server server icon, which there is no public IP available for the Minecraft server. Sorry, it's all private stuff. The Y position, that's what we were doing. Okay, so let's update that. We know that we need to add at least 64 pixels because that's the height of the server icon. And we also need to add the margin times 2. So 5 times 2 equals 10. Let's add 10 to it. There we go. Now let's see what happens. Ooh, sweet. At least something happened. We didn't get an empty bitmap or a black square as we expected, and we can probably figure out why that happened. So let's see. Just for the sake of argument, let's throw a debug line in here. Drawn icon 4. And we'll grab the profile stuff here, the name, and here we will put in basically the same except stating that it's missing. No icon for. There we go. Now we can have a look at the debug output and see what's going on here. Ooh. It seems that we have no icon for the second profile. This also shows you how many times the form is actually redrawn as part of this. There is no place like localhost. Oh man, love it. I'm gonna put that in a quote at some point. It's fine. Have a great day, NK Builder. Hang on a sec, I need to copy that one. That was pretty epic, actually. Yes, I am looking into adding a bot for quotes and such. Well, you can always unfollow. All right, so I need to save this somewhere. Twitch quotes. You got the first one, Sass. Oh, yes. We did love red power back then. But that's not to say that Project Red today isn't great, because it's actually one of the better. Thank you very much for the follow. Um, but yeah, those were the days. I absolutely love playing with Railcraft. I've actually constructed a couple of scripts in the past to assist with rail system management using Railcraft. The initial test builds was done with Computercraft. Now I've moved on to Open Computers, and I'm actually in the process of rebuilding my TrackMaster system, which basically supports networking and monitoring of where the trains are, and global control of trains and junctions and stations and tickets, and a lot of cool stuff. Anyway, that's not the business of today. Well, as you can see, the output down here actually already contains a ton of debug lines showing us that it did draw for the vanilla one, and it did not draw for the Railcraft one. Um, um, and every time we do some kind of change or update, this is actually redrawn, as you can see. And if you check the CPU process spendage, it does cost a little bit. Um, but overall, this is not something that we need to update every millisecond, so it doesn't really matter whether this has to be updated or not. The one thing that we haven't implemented here is something that lets these buttons follow the height of the window. We can simply anchor them and have them do it that way. Um, and just go from there. Um, anyway, we still need to figure out exactly why it's not showing the black square as it was supposed to do. Alternatively, we can just force a draw of a black icon here. That way we can cut away some of the extra code here. So let's just do that. Um, get rid of this. Boom, there we go. Um, let's get down here. That would be right here. So, this would then be the draw. No, sorry, a fill rectangle. We need a black brush for that, so we might as well take advantage of the one that's already made for us. And we need to draw this at the X and Y position and have a size of 64 by 64 pixels. There we go. Nice. Now we should get a black square. Boom. Nice. Okay. We definitely rule the world. Sweet. We're actually getting some stuff done here. One thing that would be nice to do is maybe make the server name a little bigger. So for the sake of it, we will add in a custom font for this. Let's go with name font and do a new font based on the current font. Let's do we'll do a bold. And actually, we need a size. Let's set this to, I don't know. I think it's at 8 something, so let's try with a 12. 0.0 and do it bold. That should be good enough. And then we simply replace the reference to the forms font with the new one we created. Boom, bigger text. There we go. Okay, as you can see, we can put some custom stuff on here. We still have a problem which involves us being able to detect if the mouse actually hits one of these two profiles, maybe capture a click to allow selection of them. Let's see if we can get some of that stuff done. Now, every form, every user control has events available where we can detect, say, the mouse moving, the mouse entering a form. We can detect whether something is focused, when it loses focus, and so on and so forth. All right. So, for the sake of being able to detect if we are inside one of these profiles that are currently rendered, we can go capture another event, which would be the mouse move. So let's grab that. There we go. This is also a form event, so we'll move it up here. Since it logically happens after the form is shown, that's the reason I'm putting it here. From here we can then see if the mouse moves inside one of the profiles or outside one of the profiles, simply by checking the X and Y position of the mouse event arcs. Now, since we already have a maximum width determined here, and we also know how many profiles we need to loop through, we have the margin defined, perhaps it would be a good idea to migrate these settings to, say, a constant. That way we can change these dimensions and thereby the positioning of things just by altering the constant variable value. So let's do a private const that says, I don't know, server profile maximum width equals 500 in pixels. Would of course help if I also remembered to put this in. It needs to be an int. The other thing that we should probably put up there is the margin. So let's add that. Private const int server profile margin. We set that to 5 pixels. There we go. Then we can get rid of max width and reappropriate all of this stuff. Right there, server profile maximum width. We need that this is, we know that this is the margin, and of course we also need to update the Y position, which is right here. So we will grab the server profile margin times 2. There we go. When we get to the point of implementing some kind of selection box, we will probably do that right about here. Selection box. The reason for doing it here is so that we can draw the selection box and then draw all the other stuff on top of it, in case we want to do a filled one, or maybe an image to act as the selector. Okay, we changed these to those numbers. So let's go down here and do a quick check. So int, we'll do a hover index, set it to -1. Then we will loop through each of our profiles. Actually, we had a count right there to save on typing. There we go. And then we need to calculate the actual position of this particular server profile. So let's do the x position, which equals, again, we need the inner width, which we don't have here. So we may want to go and convert these into usable variables instead, and do inner width equals 0, inner height equals 0. And then we shall simply change these. That way we can have the paint event update the actual inner width and height for us. Since the paint event runs pretty frequently, there shouldn't be a huge problem in doing it this way, except that right here we will need to change this to a local variable. That way we can maintain a correct full inner height of the form in case we need it for something else. So here we will do this. Let's see, we can't name this inner height, so let's just do profile height instead. And this of course needs to be inner height minus all the other stuff. There we go. Then we change this one and this one. And let's see if we need to change it somewhere else. Should be fine. Okay. There we go. Let's go down and fix these. Alright, so the actual x position, that would be pretty much identical to the calculation done right here. We also know that the actual y position is pretty much identical, so let's grab that one. Let's put these in here. There we go. And then we shall do a quick check. Let's see if the x position of the mouse is greater than or equal to the x position that we calculated above, and it is less than or less than the x position above plus the server profile maximum width, then at least the x position is correct. But the y position needs to be correct as well. So that's pretty much the same thing, except we reference the y position greater than or equal to, and it is less than the current y position plus 64, because that's the height. If this is the case, then the hover index becomes equal to the profile. We can break out, and then we can dump that information here just to have a look at it and see exactly what happens. That would be profile mouse hovering over profile index and then hover index to string. There we go. Now we should see these being spewed out. But instead of us ending up having in the console output, we'll only do these if the hover index is greater than -1. So we should now be able to see these change between 0 and 1. When we move the mouse across the form. So let's see. There we go. It fits for the first profile, but not the second. Does anybody know why we are not getting the second one? Well, one thing that we haven't done is that we haven't incremented the Y position. Just like we did up here during the draw, we also need to update the Y position down there according to profile count and the margin and all that stuff. So we'll grab a copy of this, add that to the check, and now we should be able to see it capturing both of them. 1, 0, 1, 0. Now this triggers for every pixel the mouse travels across the form. So having it trigger this many times to, for example, update a hover focus or have it update the actual selection box would effectively mean that we need to redraw this pretty many times. So that's not something that we want to do. What we can do is add another variable and then add in a hover effect. So let's go up here and declare one here, variable, and do let's see, profile hover index, set that to -1. At some point we're going to have to add in an actual selection box, so we might as well put that up here as well. Now that we are at it, selection index, again set that to -1. So right here, to do draw hover selection box. Once the detection is done, we'll get back to this exact line in a minute. Down here, we know that we are getting a hover index, which is right here. We also know that if we are outside the range of each individual server profile, hover index will end up being -1. So we can use this to detect effectively a hover/unhover event. Else inside a server profile, and this would be outside our server profile. Alright, so here we will compare the current hover index, if it's different from the profile hover index, then we will update the profile hover index. So profile, IntelliSense derped up again, hover index, and then we will invalidate the form to have it redraw. Now, since we are setting these right here, that effectively updates which profile we are currently hovering the mouse over, and at the next move, if the mouse is still inside that profile, these two variables will be identical and thereby not trigger an update. If we are down here outside, then we need to see if the profile hover index is greater than -1. If it is, then we need to clear it. So we will clear it, hover index equals -1, and invalidate again. There we go. Alright, then we will go up and do some draw magic. Right here, we need to see if P equals the profile hover index, then we shall do a graphics dot let's just do a draw rectangle, and for this we need a pen. Pens dot I have no idea. Yeah, we'll use the dark goldenrod. Probably not the best idea actually. It's going on a gray background, so let's see. What do we have here? Firebreak. We'll use this one. Doesn't really matter after all. So here we need a rectangle, which would be the current X position, the current Y position, the server profile maximum width, and the height. There we go. Now, this should set a box behind both the icon and the text whenever we move over one of the two server profiles. So let's see if this actually works. Boom. And it's not like it's sluggish or anything. Sweet. The only thing kind of wrong here is that the hover rectangle is actually 1 pixel too tall compared to the icon, and it's not exactly showing up as a proper hover thing behind or just outside the icons themselves. But it's a small visual thing that we can definitely mess some more with, so why don't we do that and probably select a different color. It's not pretty. So now we do have a margin for this hover effect. Let's have a quick look at the actual color of the background, which is listed right here, 64, 64, 64. So we will do one that is slightly darker, and set it up so it better matches the margin that we've defined. So to begin with, we will do a graphics dot fill rectangle, and we will do a new solid brush, and then we will specify our specific color, which takes full alpha, and then we'll do, say, 58, 58, 58, which should be a slightly darker color, and then we will do a new rectangle, and this would then be the X position minus the server profile margin, as well as the Y position minus the server profile margin, and the width would then be the server profile maximum width plus the margin times 2. There we go. And finally the height, which of course also would be the icon height plus the margin times 2. And just so we can better see this, we'll do this. That would be the X position, the Y position, the actual width, the actual height, and let's see, this one would be the rectangle. There we go. Alright, now on top of this one, we will draw a another rectangle, and this one will just be new pen color dot from check, yeah, color dot from ARGB. Let's do, I don't know, 96, 96, 96, 96, and then effectively the same right here. So we'll grab this and stuff it in there. So they should end up having pretty much the same size. Now I know by experience that for some weird reason, drawing an empty rectangle, is always 1 pixel wider and 1 pixel higher than doing a filled one. I'm not entirely sure why, but it happens. So to adjust for that, we may need to subtract 1 right here and 1 right here. So that should take care of it. Let's see what happens. Ooh, sweet. Now we have a hover effect that neatly wraps around each individual profile and clears when we move the mouse outside of them. Pretty much the same thing as the buttons are doing, except we're doing it with regular draw stuff. Pretty neat. Alright. We also need to be able to select. So for that we are going to need to detect if the form is clicked. So let's go and hook the click event. Just like we have the mouse move, there is also a click event. Mouse click, which is right here. So let's grab that and move it up here. And right there. So now in this case we kind of need to figure out whether the mouse is actually being clicked inside an actual server profile area. So we could either rely on the profile hover index being, yeah, pretty much in 10 minutes, the profile hover index having been set. It should be set whenever the mouse is moved. But we all know that in coding something unexpected can always pop up. So for the sake of unifying these particular checks, I'm going to grab this particular piece of code up here and migrate that into a method that I can call and pass the X and Y position of the mouse, and it will then return an index, whether it be clicked on or if it's the mouse that just moved over that area. By doing that, we can reuse the same code to do two different kinds of checks. Okay, so let's go up here somewhere. We'll collapse this for the moment. We'll collapse this for the moment. And right here, internal helper methods. Here we will create a method called get mouse profile index. we'll pass a mouse X and a mouse Y. There we go. And then we will go grab the mouse move stuff here. Grab this quick, like so. And since we don't really need to worry too much about what happens afterwards, we need to change these to mouse X, and this over here needs to be mouse Y, and so does this one, because we don't have those now. And in case we actually do find something that matches, we will simply just return P right here. We don't need to break out because we are returning. We still need to change the Y position just as before, but if we loop through all of this and don't find anything, we will simply return -1, indicating mouse is outside all server profiles. And in case we want to be really lazy about things, we'll do an overload for it that takes the mouse event args as an argument. So private int get mouse profile index, grab this, and then return get mouse profile index e.x, e.y. And these need to be uppercase, like so. And we can now trash most of this and instead fetch it from here, passing e as the argument, just because we're lazy. This takes care of the hover stuff. And down here in the mouse click, we can do a quick check to ensure that the left button is actually used. So let's start by doing that. If the left button is used, then we'll figure out which profile might have been clicked. If e.button gets which mouse button was pressed, and we will assume that, or rather we will require that it is a left click. So if the left button is pressed during this click event, a right click can also raise the mouse click event. In this case here, it's a left click, so let's see if the index for it is something that matches. So if click index is greater than -1, then we can update the selected profile index and invalidate, just like we did in the hover, except for this case it will be an actual selection. So we'll do a check that says if the click index doesn't match the what was the name of the variable again? Let's see, it was called profile selection index. Grab this. There we go. Then we will set the profile selection index equal to the click index and invalidate. If click index is -1, then we are clicking outside the profiles, and we could easily allow such a click to be a selection clear. So we'll do that. If the profile selection index is greater than -1, then we will clear it by setting the index to -1, which of course is outside the range of a list. You can't index a position of -1 within a list. The lowest position is 0. So clear it, and we'll invalidate once more. Last thing that we need to implement is the actual selection box. Now, since we already created a nice piece of code here for the hovering, we could easily copy that and just change the colors. But again, for the sake of reusability, we will make a quick little method that will draw this box. So, private void draw selection box. We need to pass the graphics object, and we need a let's see, we need a color, and that's it. And then we will just do some fiddling with setting up this solid brush and this pen based on whatever color is passed. We can easily manipulate the background to be darker, be a darker version of the color passed. But the quick and easy way of doing it is simply to change the alpha channel, which is transparency. So let's grab this like so and copy it up here. The reason I'm copying it is to ensure that I don't lose this piece of code. Afterwards I'll delete it. So here we also need to know where to draw it, of course. So we'll have to pass the X position and the Y position of where to draw it, and then convert this to the other object. Do this, let's say 127, that's about half the strength, and then the color red value, the green value, and the blue value. This takes care of drawing the solid background, and the next part draws the border, and the border of course needs to be full strength, but again we need to specify the color. So we'll grab this and replace this quick, and we now have a simple method that takes care of drawing the actual selection box. Pretty neat. So what this does for us is here we can do hover and selection boxes. First of all, we should check whether the hover index is the same as the selection index, and they are greater than -1. So let's first see if profile selection index is greater than -1 and sorry, p equals the no, actually we will do it exactly like this one, and then we'll change this to an else. If p equals profile selection index, this means that we will draw a selection over a hover anytime. So here we need to call the draw selection box, pass the graphics object right here, the X position, the Y position, and then we'll do color dot cornflower blue for the selection, and for the hover draw selection box, need that graphics, X and Y position, and we'll do the 96, 96, 96 one that we did before, and then we'll see what it looks like. Alright, let's do a quick build. No errors detected. Let's give it a run and see what happens. Okay, so the background here showed up a little lighter than before. We can change this by changing the transparency a little bit, of course, but let's see what happens if we click here. Boom. And the selection sticks. The hover of the second profile still works, and the hover on the first profile that's currently selected is not conflicting in any way. So this is the way to correctly implement hover detection as well as selection detection. Now that we can select after the break, we can start manipulating the buttons in terms of them being enabled or disabled, and then go from there. And with this, time for a quick nature break, and we will be back in a few.